Welcome everyone to today's webinar on sustainable packaging for CPG brands. As this industry is continuing to evolve, we know that there's a lot of packaging products that are out in the world, and there's definitely been a drive over the past few years to reduce waste and also expand into more recyclable, more compostable packaging. So we're making less of a environmental footprint or leaving that behind. But it also gets really complicated, and especially when we're dealing with food that has to be safe and arrive in good condition. Otherwise, they're going to throw away the packaging and the food, and that won't be good for the environment either. So for this conversation, I've invited on Shlomo and Ellie, who are with Josh Packaging. They are experts in flexible film packaging manufacturing. They actually, and their family owns a manufacturing plant in the US and have been living this stuff their entire lives. So they're here to answer any and all of your questions as well. What we won't be covering are rigid packaging as part of this conversation, though some of the lessons can apply. Rigid would be like hard containers or hard plastic containers, whereas flexible are things like bar wrappers, pouches, stand-up pouches, bags, cellophane kind of wraps around product, anything like that. Perfect. So with that, let's get started. Shlomo, why don't you start? I'd love for you to just give a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll go over to Ellie, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Yeah, so my name is Shlomo Gulsharazian. I am Ellie's older brother. We are representing two of four brothers that all work at the company, which was started by my father and my uncle 30 plus years ago. Ellie, so I do a lot of, I'm the sales director for our team. So I speak with a lot of customers and potential customers about their packaging needs. And obviously, one of the main topics that we discuss is, or a lot of times gets brought up by our customers, is what are the sustainable options for us to move forward with our existing pouches or our existing packaging to make it more sustainable. So a lot of the stuff that we'll talk about today, I'll kind of be discussing the topics of that we chat with our customers about and how we tackle these sustainability problems to make sure that our customers can continue with really good packaging while still trying to accomplish their sustainability goals.
Awesome, Shlomo. Love that. Ellie, why don't you jump in and give a quick overview of your perspective and kind of areas that you oversee?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Ali Golsharazian. As Shlomo said, I'm his younger brother, and I've been with the company for 9 years. And I am one of the manufacturing directors for Josh Packaging. My twin brother is another manufacturing director. So pretty much what I do is from the time an order is placed to the time it's out the door, I am one of the leaders in charge of when it comes to how it's manufactured here, all of the employees, the machineries we use. And, regarding the sustainability question, one of the key things that we really tackle here is not only how does the sustainable alternative material run in our machines, but we also take into consideration how it'll run on your machines as well. So we do a deep dive down, whether it's running on your machines or whether you're using a co-manufacturer, what kind of machines you're using, what incumbent materials are you using now, and what kind of challenges you might see by switching over to the materials. So, the combination of Shlomo from sales and me from the manufacturing, we partner up and we make a very, very good team to answer all the questions and really prepare you that if you are to transition to a different kind of material, what you can expect, not just from the hard cost side, but also from the soft cost side of, how it'll run on your machine.
Love that. So let's jump right into it. I know a lot of people come to Shlomo, right? And they're like, hey, we want our packaging to protect our product, increase the shelf life, act as a moisture barrier. And oh, by the way, we want it to be recyclable, compostable, some form. And so I'd love to kind of jump through like, as you think about creating packaging, it's not just like here's a stock option that everyone uses. Packaging is really built in layers based on the purpose of what it needs to do. So I'd love for you to start off just talking through like what are the purposes of the various layers and types of material that someone might choose, and then we can jump into like how that might affect whether it is recyclable or compostable or any of those options?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just tackle it from the sales side. So obviously, when we talk to our customers, there's a number of things that we ask, and this is whether they're looking for sustainable or not, right? We need to know what are you packaging, what products are you putting in your package, what machine are you using to form your packaging when it's being filled, how is it being distributed? You know, like is it sitting on a shelf? Is it just are you sending it to distributors and they're doing it? Are you sending it to Amazon? So you don't really have a strong understanding of how the product gets distributed. What kind of temperature is it being stored in? Like there are all these different factors. Are you trying to print on it? Do you want a premium look? Do you want a matte look? Um, there's so many different questions that we need to ask our customers before even getting into the specific material structure that's involved. So once we have all of the information from our customer and we get through our checklist of what's required, then we really try to understand what's the end goal of the customer. Do they want really high barrier and shelf life? Do they want a low cost option? Are they looking for something that is as fast and affordable as possible? And then once we get from there, we're able to come up with a solution, a packaging solution that comprises of one, two, or up to three different materials that are basically laminated together to form what's called a quote unquote superstructure or a laminated structure. It's a little bit more technical that Ellie can kind of talk about a little more, but long story short, each specific material or flexible packaging material or substrate, as we say, has different properties. Some of them are more heat resistant. Some of them are very heat sealable. Some of them have high barriers. So individually, they have these specific properties, but they have some pros and cons. But when you laminate them or when you combine them together, they're able to perform as what we call a quote unquote superstructure. So once we have that superstructure together, that allows us to create something that meets the needs of our customers. Now, if we want to go down the sustainability route, what we try to do is we try to look for, even though it's a more limited option, we are able to figure out exactly what the substitute superstructure would look like using a recyclable or a more sustainable option. So it's a way for us to kind of work our way from the end goal back and understand exactly what the goals are and how to kind of accomplish them using a sustainable packaging option. So
Yeah.
And Ellie, from your perspective, how do the various materials affect the manufacturability of them and how
Mm-hmm.
that relates to everything?
Yeah, of course. So, as Shlomo said, in an ideal world, we would like to just print on one film and then just send it out to you. But because of the different properties, that you want in your superstructure, we usually have to print on one film, laminate it to another, and then laminate to another. So we get all of the core, all of the good values that you want on that total structure. So when you're going to a, a traditional lamination structure that's not recyclable, we're using primarily a few different materials. One is from a family group of PET, the other one could be a family group from polyethylene. And this gives you a really, really nice superstructure where you have good heat resistance on the outside of the film. It's nice and stiff. You get some good barrier properties. And then on the inside of the film, you have very, very good sealing properties. So this is the most cost effective. It prints really nice. It tracks on our machine really nice, which means it's going to track on your machines really nice. It's going to seal at lower temperatures. So, everything that what I'm saying now pretty much is going to make our life easier when we're producing the product. And in turn, it's going to make your life easier when you're actually filling the product into this package. Once you get to the recyclable materials, everything changes because you're using different kinds of material. So one of the key values that changes with recyclable material is that the film is softer, it's more heat sensitive, and the film is going to stretch when introduced to heat. So when we are tracking, let's say, a recyclable pouch on our pouch machine, as soon as the seal jaws come down, the material is actually going to shrink a little bit, and it's going to stretch a little bit at the same time as well. So it's a lot more waste. it's a lot more waste on the machines. It has to run a lot slower, and the operators have to be a lot more dialed in and knowledgeable about how to troubleshoot. So the same thing is going to the same logic is going to apply when it goes to your co-man or when it goes to your facility running on your formers or running on your, your pouch filling equipment as well. It's going to run a little bit slower. You could expect a little bit more waste, and you can expect that there's going to be a little bit more troubleshooting involved as well. So, based on the alternative sustainable structure that you want, there's going to be different cons. And all of them are going to involve usually the machine running a little bit slower, parameters changing, and more knowledge from the operators.
And Jordan, I think we talked about this previously, but it's honestly my job as and Ellie's, like, me and Ellie work really closely together to understand what the manufacturability of all these different materials are. And as the salesperson and as basically the account manager, it's our job to make sure that we outline all of the cons or the potential pitfalls or things that our customers should be looking for when switching to a new material structure, right? So, there's a variety of different things that we do. One of the things that we definitely recommend is if anyone is going to switch to a new material from an existing material, we almost always recommend a trial roll. And the reason why is because if you don't do a trial roll and you're just like, no, we trust it, we're just going to go with it. We trust our operators, everything's going to go well. You wind up ordering, let's say, like 500,000 impressions of a specific item. It could cost up to like $50,000, who knows? And suddenly you put it on your machine and you realize it doesn't work the way you need it to. And now you're $50,000 in the hole. We would never really recommend, unless you're in a real pinch, we would not recommend moving forward with any sort of new material structure, especially one that is sustainable, without going forward with some sort of trial roll, just to be 100% certain that it is going to work for you. And we definitely understand that a lot of times packaging needs to come, yesterday, and you have orders that you need to fulfill, but we wouldn't be doing our due diligence, and we'd be doing a disservice to our customers if we didn't at least tell them what the potential pitfalls are and recommending some sort of trial roll to make sure that they know that they can run on their machine and that they know that it will last when it has the properties needed to make sure that you have the successful product you want to sell.
Yeah, I think that's so important because there's a lot of wasted money and time that can do that. I've talked to lots of brands who have maybe moved to a new manufacturer or changed their packaging along with moving
Yeah,
to a new manufacturer, and they're
definitely.
like, oh, we just have to run it, end up not just wasting the packaging but also all the product and raw
Yep,
materials that go inside of there as well, especially if you're on a machine that can run thousands of units per minute.
exactly.
Then that's a lot of waste. I know we mentioned a couple different materials now. I want to just stop and remind everyone, if you have questions about anything that we've mentioned, feel free to jump into the chat. Let us know. I'll be keeping an eye on that. So maybe it'll be a good time to pull up
Yeah.
the PDF, kind of looking through. We don't have to go through in like very strong detail, but an overview of the different packaging materials that are most commonly used in the film, to give people a little bit of a rundown of like the pros and cons of each, and then how they are going to be making decisions around each of that. Because as I know, Ellie was mentioning like 4 or 5 different materials, and it's hard to keep track of what's what. And this is something that we can share after the presentation as well.
Yep. So I have a list of like 4 different specific options that we've used for our customers. There's obviously a variety more. There's a ton more. What we're looking at right now are high barrier sustainable packaging options. So it'll make more sense when I talk a little bit more about this, but a lot of times, we're using snack foods, things that aren't in the freezer. You need a higher barrier, so like a metallized film. So if you look at chip bags, there's typically some sort of silver inside of it, and that's basically a lamination that involves some sort of metallized layer because metal has really high barrier properties. There are also clear barrier properties, which we'll go through here, clear barrier films that we'll go through here as well. But we're going to be going through high barrier options. So the first thing that we talk to our customers about when they're trying to be more sustainable or environmentally friendly is, what if we think about down gauging or reducing the amount of material that we use for packaging? So one way that we do that is, instead of, let's say, having something that's like 4.5 mil or a 4.5 thickness, don't worry about the number itself, just something that's very thick. Maybe we can go to something that's less thick, that uses less film, and has the same amount of barrier properties involved. So that's like the first thing that we typically bring up with our customers. If we feel like, based on the machine ability that they have right now with their film, or the machines that they're using right now, that there's a thinner gauged option that can save them both money and potentially, have a stronger environmental impact by reducing the amount of film that they're using, then that's the first thing that we do. If that's not an option, a lot of customers, or a lot of people, a lot of customers have been using, for clear barrier film, something called PVDC PET. Now, it is a lot more affordable option for a lot of people, but it's frowned upon in the environmentally friendly community. So there's something called ALOX PET, which is basically, I think it stands for aluminum oxide, right, Ellie?
Yep.
It's basically a very thin layer of a metallized structure that's clear, that is added to the standard PET that Ellie was talking about before, that you can add to your film. And this is a really good way for people to move away from PVDC if that's something that they're using, and using ALOX. Obviously, it has really good barrier properties. You can see the pros and cons. The only thing to note is, as with anything, typically that's sustainable, is ALOX PET is more expensive than PVDC PET. So, there will be a trade-off. However, when it comes to machinability, the look, the feel, the way it runs on your machines and all that stuff, there will be no difference. So ALOX PET is a really valuable option for customers if they're looking to go through the sustainable route.
Yeah. Gentlemen, just 1 second.
Yep.
So just to clarify, so PET PET is recyclable symbol 1, and that's usually the printing layer and the lamination structure. And it has decent barriers, but if your application requires better barriers, then we apply a coating on top, and that's what this ALOX is. This ALOX is a coating that goes onto the PET. And PVDC is another coating that goes on PET. PVDC is worse for the environment, so we can transition someone to use an ALOX coating instead of a PVDC coating.
When it has the ALOX coating, is that recyclable?
So you can get ALOX PE, and I have to check the latest on that, but it's potentially a no. It really depends on how much of the ALOX is comprised to the percentage of the total packaging.
Got it. Because it's
And
that
Jordan,
metallized.
I'm glad you asked about recyclability, because what I want to make sure that everyone understands how something is recyclable. So like Ellie mentioned, there's a variety of different plastic families that are used in flexible packaging. PET is one, LDPE or polyethylene is four. Right, Ellie?
Yeah, so PET is one. The triangle symbol on the back of packaging,
Yeah.
and it means something what the number is in the middle of it. So number 1 is PET. Number 2 is high density polyethylene. Number 3 is, I can't remember on the top of my head. Number 4 is low density polyethylene. Number 5 is polypropylene. Number 6 is styrofoam. And number 7 means that it's a blend of plastics, which pretty much means it's not recyclable, and it's really a gimmick that it has the recyclable symbol 7, because it means it's not recyclable.
Yeah. But the way for something to be recyclable, just so everyone knows, is for all of the materials that are used, all the plastic materials we use, to be from the same family. So that's why when we talk about the standard structure of PET to PE is obviously a really good option for everyone, but it's not recyclable because you have one material combining with another material that are in different families. You have PET, which is number 1, and PE, which is usually number 4. So the way to get around this is you can do a polyethylene to polyethylene structure, which is option number 2, which can also have a high barrier or not a high barrier, depending on what you want. But like Ellie said, there are some drawbacks when it comes to the machinability of it. because it's all polyethylene, so you don't have that super high heat resistance that a PET will offer you. It also stretches and retracts when it works on the
Mm.
machine because it has a really strong reaction to heat.
Mhm.
However, it is recyclable.
Yeah.
So that's the thing to keep in mind is you can get recyclable pouches or recyclable roll stock, but there are going to be some drawbacks with machinability. Not that it's not something that a lot of people are doing and that they figure it out because they have good operators, or obviously we have really good relationships with our film suppliers that can make as heat resistant of PE film as possible based on their blends and the way that we work with them. But that's the biggest thing to note is you can always go, there's almost always a recyclable option, but there will be some drawbacks in term, especially in terms of machinability and the way that it looks.
Yeah. Jordan, you mentioned before, can you get A-lock? If you put A-locks on something, does it make it recyclable? So usually it's usually that's not really an option, because what you would do for a PE to PE lamination is for the sealing layer, we would add something called EVOH in the polyethylene. And that EVOH is your barrier layer, and the EVOH LDPE is all recyclable.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted a recyclable pouch that has high barrier, you wouldn't use the ALOX option. You would just add EVOH, which is an additive, into the sealing polyethylene.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. I think one thing to note that you have on here is for the LDPE in this situation that's on the screen is recyclable for store drop-off programs, right? So this is when stores have those bins in the front that say, hey, drop your plastic bags off here, which are usually meant for like shopping bags, but you're like that's a similar material, right? Where that can be recycled at there, but a lot of locations in the US are not, it's not home recyclable.
Ellie, why don't you give your spiel on like the infrastructure on sustainability and how it's not necessarily helping the green
Yeah.
cause?
How honest do we want to be here? Um, I think what really tells the whole story is, I right now I live in a really in a nice part of on Long Island, and I go 5 miles, north to another town on Long Island. It could be a nice town as well. And they have everything is different there when it comes to their recycling. They have different bins. They have, they recycle this and that, and then but they don't recycle this. And I really think that tells the whole story about what gets recycled and what doesn't get recycled. No one, we're in the packaging business, and we're having trouble, understanding what's recyclable and what's not recyclable. So imagine just an average consumer when they're going to the supermarket and they pick up a chip bag and they dispose of it at home. What bin does it go to? And let's just say they do understand what recycle bin it goes to. Does the actual person picking up your trash and the recycling facility understand, how it should be sorted? And if they do, 10 miles away, they have different rules. And, we're not even talking about different counties, different states, everything. I think that, more or less that it's sad. It's a sad reality that the majority of what can be recycled doesn't get recycled in this country. And I think a lot of it stems from a lack of education and a lack of standardization stemming from the sanitation companies.
And I
Yeah.
think what's important kind of about that as well is as a brand, as you're thinking about your goals, do you want to make the packaging sustainable or recyclable so that you can add that as is it marketing for you, or is it just a core value that you have in
Mm-hmm.
terms of
Yeah.
wanting to reduce the impact as much as possible? And you're going to take the extra steps to educate your customers on how to actually go about recycle it or
Yeah.
other different
Yeah.
uses. To think about, is it a nice to have or is it core to your identity
Yeah.
as a
And those
brand
are
and
some
fan?
and those are some of the questions that Shlomo and the sales team, probe. It's a no judgment zone. We want to understand what your end goals are. Is it marketing, which, there's nothing wrong with that, or is it something a little bit deeper than that? And whatever it is, we're going to give you the facts, and you guys will tell us what to do.
It's
Awesome.
amazing, Jordan. Sometimes people ask for recyclable packaging and we look at their artwork that they're approving and there's no sign that it's recyclable. There's no sign that it's store drop off recyclable. So that's the other thing I would say is if you are going to go with some sort of sustainable route, definitely push your graphics team to have some sort of messaging on it that says, you know, this is compostable, this is recyclable, or this is made from post-consumer resin. Like 30% of this film is recyclable. And what I actually thought that this would be a good opportunity to bring up the fourth option, which is using post-consumer resin. So Ellie, Todd, and Jordan were mentioning the potential, the uncertainty around how things are getting recycled and whether or not it's getting recycled correctly, right? So there really is a burden on the end consumer to, you know, dispose of your product, that of your packaging that is recyclable in the appropriate way. What post-consumer resin does is actually using film or plastic resin that's already been used. So it's recycled film that we put into that is inside of the film that we create your packaging for. So instead of having the burden of recyclability or sustainability be placed on your consumer, it's actually being already absorbed by you as the customer, because or as the company, which is a really cool thing. So now you know that the product that you're putting out there is an environmentally conscious product because it's using recycled material. Um, that's something that I think is a really cool option for customers that are trying to be as environmentally friendly as possible. The only thing is, it's not necessarily as sexy as saying that your product is recyclable. However, if you are to go that route, it's definitely a good idea to put some sort of, you know, some sort of text on it saying that this is made from recycled product, or 30% of this packaging is made from recycled product. It's a really cool thing that more and more customers are using. The sweet spot is about 30% of the material is made from that recycled resin or that old recycled film. The only thing to note is if you go a little bit higher, there could be more gel caps, and the clarity is not necessarily as good as like a standard virgin film. So again, this is the time where we really discuss with the customer what is important to them. Do they need something that is super clear? Are they really focused on the graphics? Or like you said, Jordan, is the core value of sustainability something that they really want to bring forward to their market? So again, it's all about like pressure testing with the customer, understanding what's important, what isn't, and then trying to figure out what the goals are so we can kind of meet them for them.
I love that. Let's jump into industrial compostable because we also have a question a little bit later on that as well.
Yeah.
In terms of what kind of materials are compostable, and then the pros and cons of that.
Yeah.
Ellie, can you talk about that?
Yeah. So when it comes to compostable films, it's broken down into two different categories. One is industrial compostable and one is home compostable. When it comes to industrial compostable, the films that we're typically using is something called PLA film. PLA stands for some technical scientific word like poly something acid, I don't know, something like that. And it's traditionally derived from sugar canes and plants like that, and then it gets processed in a lab. So the difference between industrial compostable is the amount of time it takes to compost and the setting and the actual compostable setting it needs to compost in that specific amount of time. So with industrial compostable, I believe the standards are always changing. But the last I checked, I think it's 90 to like 180 days in a industrial compostable facility. So if you take your industrial compostable packaging and it goes to an industrial compostable facility, it will compost within, let's say, 120 days into carbon dioxide and water. So it's not emitting anything harmful into the environment. Now, home compostable is usually something that's made out of cellulose film. Cellulose, like the outer membrane on trees, and that is home compostable. So you could theoretically take your package, dig a hole in your backyard, and it will compost to carbon dioxide and water without emitting any toxins into the environment. And I think it's under 90 days, and I think that's how it breaks down. So there are pros and cons to PLA film and cellulose film, but that generally is the difference between the PLA versus the home compostable.
But from a sales perspective, or at least when I'm talking to customers, compostability is obviously something that sounds really cool. but in practice, it's very difficult to implement in a way that that the end consumer will be happy with. I think the main thing to note is that the feel and the look of the compostable film itself is really different. It's super stiff. It's very loud. So it might
It's
print
very like
okay and look
crinkly. It
okay.
almost sounds like
It's
crinkling a
very
bag of
crinkly.
potato chips kind of thing.
Exactly. And I think, you know, if you're trying to come off as like a premium product on the shelf, because most people aren't doing compostable, your product will stand out, but it might not necessarily stand out in the way that you want it to. The film
Yeah.
itself feels really kind of, for lack of a better word, cheap. And I think, you know, we know how important packaging is. You know how important, you know, there's a billion competitors out there selling very similar products. And you want to make sure that your packaging is as good as possible. So if you are looking for a packaging option that looks good, feels good, looks premium, feels premium, it's tough. It's a tough sell for someone once they actually see what the compostable material feels like and looks like. The other
With
thing,
that being, yeah,
yeah,
but so just with that being said, there are still high barrier industrial
yep,
compostable options and high barrier home compostable options. And you know, in roll stock format and in pouch format.
yep,
So you know, we could still do it. It is a lot crispier, and when it tears, it really tears right through. So
mm-hmm,
you know, there might be some more web breaks, and it might be a little bit more annoying and frustrating to run on your machineries, but it is doable. We have made a lot of industrial compostable pouches using compostable zippers. You know, we use compostable inks if need be. But you know, it is doable. It's just, you know, it's something that, you know, we want to manage your expectations so that you can
yeah.
manage your end consumers' expectations as well. And we're not
I
even
think
talking about the price.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the other things that I'll mention is the lead times are typically a lot longer because there's only so much compostable film out there for a variety of different reasons, and that leads to longer lead times. And honestly, most importantly, when we talk to customers, they need to understand that compostable film pricing is a lot higher than, you know, recyclable post-consumer resin, any other film option. So again, it's a big trade-off when going to compostability. But like Ellie mentioned, all of these options are things that we offer in either high barrier or low barrier. It's just a matter of understanding, like Jordan said, what your core values are and really what you're trying to bring to market.
Thanks, guys. We have a question as well. Let me know if it might be too detailed. Allison's asking, what is the industrial compostable film made of? I think you kind of mentioned it.
Yeah,
You talked about that already.
yeah.
But how long can it hold fresh slash frozen food before it begins to break down? And that might be a
Yeah.
little technical depending on the food, but do
No,
you have
it's
any
fine.
sense?
That's a good question because we have had some inquiries in the past where I did have to ask a few of our suppliers. So one of them was it was going in a freezer and they were storing ice pops. So obviously the condensation in the freezer section is it actually going to compost the plastic, the PLA film. So according to our supplier, he said that it's fine. You know, it's perfectly fine. It's going to be fine storing in the freezer for, you know, I think he said even longer than a year. So not a real problem there. I think if you were to go home compostable in that situation, it might be a little bit more sensitive and there might be a lot more testing involved. But in terms of the industrial compostable with the PLA film, I think that you would be okay, you know, depending on the actual conditions of it. But if it's just being stored in a freezer, my assumption based on the previous conversations I had with my supplier is that you would be okay with storing it at least over a year in a freezer section.
Perfect. Awesome. And then Allison, let me know if that helped, if you have any other questions about it. And then I want to go back to another question from Nancy, who asked, what packaging or materials would effectively reduce oxidation for my product? It's manufactured in India and extending its shelf life is a priority.
So when you look at a material spec sheet, you'll see two very, very important values. One of them is something called OTR, your oxygen transmission rate, which is exactly what you're asking Nancy right now, is what are your barrier levels to prevent oxygen going in and oxygen going out of the packaging? And then the other key value that you'll see on a material spec sheet is WVTR, which is water vapor transmission rate, which is, you know, how much water is entering and exiting the packaging. So you really want to focus on the OTR in this case. And depending on, and you want that value to be as little as possible. You know, you don't want any oxygen to go into the package that's going to spoil and create this oxidation process that's going to spoil your food. So what we would do is, you know, we would understand what kind of product going inside, what your incumbent structure is, and do you want to go recyclable? Do you want to go the PCR way? Do you want to go the compostable way? And we'll make sure that, you know, in that spec sheet, that OTR value is as low as possible.
So Nancy, in this example, let's say you wanted to go with a PCR option, right? So we would recommend an ALOX PET, which has really high barriers and it's clear, and then we would also and that would be laminated to a PCR PE. So these are the type of discussions that we have with a lot of our customers is what are you looking for? And then we give them a recommendation based on the product that they're packing and exactly the most important needs. So in your case, it would be having really high barriers. So that's why we would recommend that option.
One thing that's really, really important and critical for everybody to understand is that we are not food scientists. We don't understand the
Yeah.
composition of what's going inside your package. The only thing we could tell you are the oxygen transfer rates and the water vapor transfer rates. And then what you would do is you would take that to your food scientist, or you would third party it out, and you could understand how this data is going to impact, you know, your shelf life. And there are a lot of companies out there that expertise and specializes in that.
Awesome. Love that. Thanks so much for your answer. And Nancy, let us know if you have any other questions on that. And then I'm going to go to a question by Danielle, who asks, can you expand on ways to trial a new packaging without large investment? I'm thinking like, is it smaller? Can you get smaller rolls?
Yeah,
Or those going in
so
stock
Danielle,
or not
typically
printing?
typically part of the process of understanding your packaging needs are what sort of machinery you are using to package your product. So what we would do is we would offer you a trial roll that meets the specs that we would be potentially making in larger quantities for you once you go down the road of understanding what you're, you know, if you want to place a larger order. So we would send you like 1 or 2 rolls that meet the specific spec and dimensions of what you would be packaging. And ideally, they would specifically fit to the specs of the machine that you're packaging them on. Now, if you want to change the type of packaging that you're offering, like let's say you were doing something on a vertical form fill and seal machine, and instead you want to change to some sort of like stand-up pouch or a wicketed bag, which is semi-automated, then that would require you to make some sort of investment to create a new machine. But everything that we do, everything that we would offer you would be first working off of the machinery that you have, if that meets the requirements that you have for your end goals. And then if it doesn't work, we would let you know and try to figure out what like the lowest cost option for you from an investment perspective would be.
And just expanding on that, so one of the first things that Shlomo does is he'll send you a questionnaire, and in that questionnaire, it'll ask you what machine you have, what the serial number is, what the model number is, et cetera, et cetera. And then, there might be some further, some follow-up questions after we get the filled out sheet. And that's when we could even have a 3 or 4-way call with the machine manufacturer as well, just to make sure everybody's on the same page and we don't waste anyone's time and material.
Awesome. Perfect. And thanks so much for those questions. If you have any additional questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. Or if you have something that's a little bit more complicated and want to ask that directly, you can just type in the chat, I have a question, and I will call you up to ask Slomo and Ellie directly. So think about those, drop those in the chat. One question I want to ask you guys as well is your perspective on manufacturing in the US versus getting packaging abroad. I mean, obviously you have your own manufacturing plant here, and so there's a bias in terms of what you know and do, but I'd love to walk through like what are some of those pros and cons that brands might want to consider. And I'm happy to add in my own experience from that as well.
Well, for me, honestly, like it's ultimately what you're looking for as a company, right? So the benefit of working with a company that is in the US or that's domestic is you should be getting better lead times. If you go overseas, your lead times can be double, triple, quadruple. You know, we've heard horror stories from a lot of people that have called us asking for our lead times and are simply shocked by how much lesser they are than from their existing suppliers that they're getting from overseas. The other thing that I think is really critical and important is the communication is going to be way better when you're speaking with someone, you know, with it, you know, that's in the same country as you, that can speak the same language as you a lot of time, but most importantly is just more readily available to have discussions and partner with you. There's a lot more transparency as well when working with us as opposed to some overseas suppliers, and that's just the nature of it. But you know, I think those are the two main things that I would say are some of the key that I would say are the draws of working with a domestic supplier. And then the other thing is you can always come to our plant, which hopefully isn't too far from you, whether it's for press approval to meet the team. If you're going overseas, it's obviously a lot farther. The proximity isn't necessarily there. So it might be a little bit harder for you to go for a press approval when you're running a job for the first time or meeting the team there.
Yeah. And just to expand on that, Jordan, you mentioned this before at the beginning of the webinar, is that, you know, flexible packaging is not a one size fits all type of deal,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a lot of technical specs floating around when it just comes to one package. And now you might have 10 different SKUs, you might have 15 different SKUs, you might have 25 different SKUs, and all of them are going to require a different touch on them to make them run, to make them perform the way they're supposed to perform. When you go overseas, like Shomo said, not only does not only, you know, is the communication lacking, but also the values are different overseas versus
Yeah.
domestic. You know, domestic, we understand we are here as your consultants. We're not just here as your manufacturer. And we're going to do whatever we can, not just to get you packaging that's going to perform the best, but we're going to go to your facility, watch it run. We're going to help you try to get those machines running as fast as possible. We're going to do whatever we can to make sure, you know, anything packaging related, you know, it's going to be beneficial to you. When you go overseas, the values are just different. It's more you cut a PO, you know, we'll make it, we'll ship it to you. Fingers crossed everything works out, and then we'll wait for the next one. And I think just the whole philosophies are very, very different. And if you're a smaller company, if you're a growing company, you need help. We want you to use us as much as you can. Leverage us, you know, ask questions, tell us to come by to watch this machine run, get us involved with the machine purchase, let us send you samples. All these things are going to elevate you quicker to the next level of your growth, much quicker than just, you know, buying something, getting it shipped to your loading dock, using it, and then cutting another PO. And you know, I think that's really the big difference is just the philosophy difference.
Yeah.
It's not only that they are literally, you know, thousands of miles further away from us, but their philosophy is much different.
I
And
can't
that
speak for other companies necessarily in America, but I know for us, my father and uncle started the business like 30, 35 plus years ago. And as we entered, they made sure that we understood that, you know, yes, we are a manufacturing company, but we're also just as importantly in the service industry. So that's kind of ties into what Ellie was saying, in that we really do try to partner with our customers to find out, to figure out with them the optimal solutions with, you know, the hand-to-hand support that we can provide.
yeah. And then the one last thing I would say about the lead times is, you know, you could project as best as you could, and you could think that you're good. You know, you could think everything is right. And then the last second, you know, Walmart or Trader Joe's comes to me and say, I need 2 million bags and I need it in 2 weeks. It's impossible for the overseas company to do, because it will take a few weeks for them to get the package to you just on a boat. And then if you want, if they can do it, then you're going to be spending thousands and thousands of dollars with the air freight. And, you know, that's something that we accommodate because we understand the way the industry goes. You know, sometimes there are last second jams, and we have to come through with them, because at the end of the day, when you succeed, we succeed.
As a different topic, and thanks for answering that, what are some of the ways of reducing the amount of packaging that actually goes into each product, as we think about different types? I know you mentioned earlier, one example is, you know, maybe with certain substrates, you can use a thinner material and get similar barrier properties than others where it might be thicker. What are some of those other kind of conversations that you want to have with brands to think about like reducing
Yeah.
overall use?
I think honestly, the biggest thing that we're seeing more and more of is um, companies going from rigid to flexible, or rigid and flexible to flexible. So just as a basic example, we work with a lot of seafood companies. And one of the things that you'll see in frozen seafood is in the freezer section, you'll see that they have boxes, printed, beautiful corrugated boxes with individually wrapped or flexible packaging inside of their boxes. So first of all, they're using two different packagings. So that's like a big waste on packaging, if you ask me. Second of all, they're using two different packaging types, so it's not necessarily as environmentally friendly because you're using two different types that can't get recycled together, that whole spiel. And then you're probably using two different suppliers. So a lot of seafood companies and frozen food companies especially are starting to transform from going to a rigid plus a flexible inside of it to just a flexible stand-up pouch or a roll stock.
Yeah,
And that's honestly a huge thing that we're seeing in the market.
yeah,
The other thing is if you go to Costco, I love Costco. They have I'm wearing something from Costco. They have the I remember I saw this like a year and a half or 2 years ago. One of the things that I always get is like they have the really big they have the big container of the shelled nuts, the fancy nuts, and it used to be in a rigid clear plastic container with the lid on it, and that was fine. I think last year or relative recently they moved to a completely flexible stand-up pouch.
yeah,
And there's so many different benefits of going to flexible instead of rigid. It's less expensive. It transports easier. It's lighter. It's more sustainable.
yeah.
There's a ton of different reasons for it. And I think that's the biggest trend that we're really seeing is customers going from rigid to flexible.
Another example is in the cereal industry. We all, when I was a kid, you had cereal came in a box, and then inside the box you had that plastic liner. Now a lot of cereals are now packed in a lamination pouch. So they got rid of the corrugated box, and now everything is packed in a pouch. And by the way, that pouch is also going to give you better barriers too.
Yeah,
So the cereal will preserve longer.
last.
But
And my favorite part about those is most of those are then resealable as well, which is
yeah,
always
and they're
the
resealable.
biggest pet
So
peeve.
it's a win-win for
Massive.
everyone. My advice for you is, everybody needs are different. Everybody has different machineries. Everybody has different starting points. You do your research, see what other people are doing, in your industry. So go to trade shows. And I'm not talking about the trade shows where you're trying to sell. Go to trade shows where you're actually trying to purchase equipment and have conversations and see what other people are doing. Because it's amazing what's out there. It's amazing what could be customized. And, a lot of it does end up falling on the filling equipment about what can be consolidated into one package versus two or three. So, get yourself out there, do your research and talk to as many people as possible. And you might be the first one to come up with a solution, and it might get you ahead of other people, your competition.
I love that. Sri had a question is, do you know if Alox is used in beverage cans as well? I know you guys don't do any cans, but not sure.
I don't think so. I think it's just aluminum.
Yeah,
But
it's not used in beverage cans.
so
A-Lox is something specifically used in flexible packaging. So I assume, Sri, maybe you're trying to think of a translucent can that also has a similar barriers to a aluminum can. Is that what the envision is?
Yeah, Sri, if you want, you can come on off mute and ask her, add some more context.
coatings inside the can.
No, definitely not, because it's not FDA approved for direct food contact.
Cool.
So it definitely can't be inside the can. Could it be sandwiched in the can? We're not experts in rigid packaging, so I don't know, but I don't think it's possible. I don't,
Yeah, because that wouldn't be used for that
yeah.
use case. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Well, perfect. If there's no more questions, I think we'll wrap it up. But if you do have a last minute question, let me know as well in the chat. But Ellie and Shlomo, thanks so much for joining today and providing this level of detail. There's a lot here, and so we're going to be sharing the recording along with an image of that sustainable material guide so that you can review that and share that with your team. If you have a need for packaging now and want to work with someone who understands all the different variables to consider. I'll put Shlomo's information in our follow-up email as well. Reach out so that you can ask your questions and get the answers that you need. I'm actually going to drop his email into the chat here now. And then that way, if you have any questions, copy that out and you can ask them directly. Shlomo and Ellie, thanks so much for being on today as always and for sharing your perspective.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, everyone.
Wait, we got a question.
I
Oh.
just wanted to check, will you be sharing the spec sheet as well?
The one that we shared of the different materials.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank
And
you.
Nancy, if you want to reach out to me, like over the email that Jordan just sent out with specific things, more than happy to go over what your specific needs are. Not a problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Have a good one.
everyone. Have a great day.